Welcome back once again, ladies and gentlemen, to the Adventures in Historyland YouTube channel. We're kicking things off with a good friend of mine, a good and esteemed friend of mine, Amarpal Sidhu. He is an author and historian. He has written I believe, the definitive books on the Anglo-Sikh Wars, and his new book about the Siege of Delhi in 1857. Amarpal, finally, you have appeared on the channel.
Well, thanks for having me on the show, Josh. It's great. We're sort of connected on Facebook and Twitter. Although I haven't been interacting that much on those sort of platforms recently, but we've been connected for a while, haven't we? But not on YouTube. So yeah, it's really good.
You are amongst the old guard, actually, of people who I knew when I first came onto Twitter with Historyland. Actually, you and Nick Britton and Mark Simner, people like that, who were there when Historyland was, well, just Historyland, but it's not changed very much.
Yeah.
Yes, we've never done a YouTube recording before, although we've often talked about doing something with YouTube over the years.
Yeah.
So it's really fun to do this now. And today we're talking about the many named conflict that happened in India in 1857, which is commonly called the Indian Mutiny, which is often sometimes called a War of Independence. I don't know which War of Independence you would have to name that if it was the case, or just plain old War of 1857. We should probably agree on a name to call it, but it has several phases, so actually you can call it any number of names and it'd still be accurate.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, I just I suppose I naturally just call it, the mutiny. I think we're sort of so used to calling it, the mutiny that that's what it is. But there's a sort of move in India to sort of relabel it, War of Independence or First War of Independence, and I'm not sure that really hits the mark. If anyone reads about the mutiny, they'll probably very quickly realise it was mainly a sepoy mutiny. The country wasn't really at that stage where there was some sort of national feeling, if you like, and certainly the vast bulk of the the sort of civilian population didn't rise up. It's a bit of a stretch to call it, the First War of Independence.
It is familiar to Amarpal and myself as the Indian Mutiny or the Great Mutiny or the War of 1857. So that's probably what the name you will hear most in this conversation. But in many ways, it was, as you were saying, quite a typical kind of war that erupted out of the mutiny, in which various factions kind of chose whether they wanted to gain something from it, or if they saw an opportunity to gain something from it, they joined in and they picked sides. It devolved into a very classic kind of war that had been happening in India certainly since the British had arrived, and before that as well, to be honest. And as you were saying, the central core of this is the Sepoy Mutiny. And so to understand what we're going to talk about today, which is the Siege of Delhi, which is probably the decisive theatre of the war, we're going to start things off by chatting a little about how we get to this point. Your thoughts?
Yeah, sure. Well, just to give a background, Josh, the British reached Delhi, around about 1803. That was when the Battle of Delhi was fought. With Lord Lake.
See my book.
That's right. Yes. So you're going to be covering that. So quick for anyone wanting to know a little bit more about the sort of background to this conflict, you might want to read your book. But yeah, 1803. So the British reached Delhi and effectively took over the city in that year. So from 1803 to 1857, you had sort of 50 years of, British rule, effectively, even though there was the Mughal dynasty was still extant at that time. So you had a couple of emperors. I think Shah Alam died, what was it, 1806 or something like that.
Yeah, he didn't live very long after the British traded places with the Marathas.
That's right. Yeah, yeah. Then he passed. Obviously, it passed to his son. But the sort of the last 20, 30 years was effectively taken by Shah Alam's grandson, which was Bahadur Shah Zafar, who was probably not the right chap. As far as the mutineers were concerned, anyway, to be on the throne at that time, and although they didn't know that, quite a sort of peaceful, sort of poetry-loving chap, lover of arts, anything but sort of martial, really. So that was that sort of period. So it's quite a strange sort of limbo period, if you like. You still had the the Mughal emperor, sort of ruling nominally over Delhi, but effectively the British were in control. And during this period, you had a huge sort of sea change in the city itself. So you had a lot of Europeans moving in, taking over certain parts of the city. You had the civil lines, just north of the city being developed, which was where all the, the British administration and, other buildings were, residential buildings. And then you had the British cantonments just north of the civil lines, just past a rather sort of strange sort of ridge kind of thing, which sort of juts in the middle of the cantonments and the civil lines. So all that sort of popped up, within those 50 years. You even had, there's a British graveyard within. Delhi, the walled city of Delhi as well, going back to 1803, that sort of period as well. So quite a massive change, just before the the mutiny broke out.
Yeah, I mean, what you were saying there about the various emperors who were still extant. The dynasty. What did they call the dynasty? It was the dynasty of Timur, some people called it, and things like that, was it? Was still
Timurid
there.
dynasty, if you like. Yeah. I mean, they were quite proud of their sort of background. I mean, one root of the dynasty came from Tamerlane. If you go back to Babur, who was the the founder of the dynasty, one of his ancestors was descended from Tamerlane, and the other one from Genghis Khan, the other side of the family. So quite a sort of distinguished background.
You could see why you'd want to kind of keep that name around as harkening back. But this is Delhi is the seat of the sultans of the Mughal emperors, and very much this, as I found out when I wrote my book, is actually why the British, why in the second, what they called the Second Morato War, there was a thrust to attack Delhi, and at the time the Governor General, Richard Wellesley, was pretty much thinking, this war is pretty much going to get us Delhi. It has to get us Delhi. That means we become the guardians of the emperor. That means we essentially run the show. Because up until that point, the Marathas actually had been guardians of the emperor. And the idea of getting a hold of the person of the emperor and becoming his sword, essentially. You know, the guy who protects Delhi, protects the emperor, and therefore has a writ, essentially. The British had always run on the writ of being servants of the emperor and then sort of defenders of the emperor. And then right up until 1857, the importance of this man, this figure, became central, I believe, to the mutiny itself and to the war.
That's right. Yes. In fact, a lot of the the British sort of administrators of that time, right up to the Governor General, the various commissioners, Commissioner of Delhi, they were always a little bit uneasy, at the emperor, at the the Mughal dynasty still, continuing, even though, it had no sort of raison d'etre at that time. There's just, the chap was a pensioner, essentially, and there were moves to sort of end it, because various people realised that even though he has no power, the dynasty is it's a spent force. It's still a sort of inspiration to large elements of the population. So at some stage, it could be a problem for the British, simply because you've got this figurehead in Delhi, whether he's able or not, whether he's able to control the situation or not. Nevertheless, he is a figurehead, a kind of figurehead which no other person in India, could be. As there were sort of regional kings and what have you. But the Mughals used to essentially control most of India. So you had that sort of national sort of feel to it, the Mughal throne. So there were moves to sort of try and get rid of the dynasty, during the 1840s, 1850s, and in fact, it was planned that this chap would be the last on the throne. So, and they were just waiting for him to pop off.
Yeah.
The last thing they wanted to do was sort of throw him out of the palace, if you like, and force things along. So it was all planned to sort of end the dynasty there.
They were waiting for him to just die, because then you could easily sort of brush the Mughals into a corner and just say the British are running things completely now. We don't need to do it under the auspices of the emperor anymore. Really, what's the use of this? That was the point. And also, as you were saying, it's very, very interesting what you were saying, and just very pertinent, if that's the word I'm looking for. The very presence of this guy is actually a flight risk to British interests in India, just because on the slightest possible, just because his existence and the existence of his dynasty is a potential rallying point for. Now, the British were probably thinking in terms of invasions rather than outright rebellions, like what happened. Like, they were always worried about the Afghans and the Persians and things like that coming in and doing bad things. And the Afghans would certainly they did it before, would take Delhi if they could, the various Afghan princes and things like that. And that could be a big problem. And therefore the existence of this guy and what he represents in India is a hazard to British interests there, essentially, certainly by the middle of the 1800s. It's just something that the politicians in the East India Company, certainly the politicians in the East India Company, I should say, who are the principal people, I think, concerned about why this still exists, and there was arguments about tribute and all sorts of stuff that had to go on, because technically he still the emperor was on paper still the benefactor of the company or something like that.
That's right. Yes. Technically, the British were sort of, East India Company were, the vassals, if you like, of
Yeah.
of the Mughal emperor. Although, the situation was, absolutely, sort of diametrically, the other way round, and he was dependent on on a British pension. But yeah, you're right. I mean, he was, you used the right phrase. He was a potential rallying point. And although the British were quite well sort of settled, and they managed to sort of consolidate their hold over most of the country, by this stage. Um, it was dangerous in the sense that there just wasn't enough European troops in the country, so they were sort of dependent on the Sepoy army.
Mm.
And you just had the Anglo-Persian War. You had the Russians, with a sort of eye on Central Asia, and there's always these rumors flying around that potentially they might sort of march through Afghanistan, or have a deal with Persia and come into India. And everybody knew that it was you know, if you had such a sort of irresistible force, sort of suddenly arriving on the borders of India, then everything's up for grabs, because the British had so few European troops in India. They were quite sort of dependent on the whole thing just staying stable, if you like, and British prestige, British invincibility. Sort of keeping things in order, but if that ever went, then everything's up for grabs, really.
Indeed. And so, in investigating a bit of the background behind the Siege of Delhi, we have that, and also, as we've just been saying, the massive sepoy armies of the three presidencies, isn't it? The three presidencies of the East India Company, which was easily as big as the British Army itself, probably bigger, I think, depending on the year you choose to compare it with. And this is obviously the presidencies of Bengal, Bombay, and Madras. And the state of the Sepoy Army is a very integral subject to the Mutiny and the Siege of Delhi. As you pointed out before, the period from 1803 to 1857 is not a huge span of time, but it's a sort of an odd span of time in terms of what goes on in between it. Certainly in terms of the emperor, but also in a weird way in terms of the Sepoy army, because it gains ever more ever more impressive levels of discipline and prowess. It's used more and more. It gains a great deal of respect, certainly in India and in Asia, even amongst as they were called, kings or queens officers. But amidst all this sort of the glorious battle honors and stuff that they would put on their colors and things like that, and the way they would acquit themselves as time went on between 1803 and 1857, you also get a breakdown within it of connection between the European elements of the presidency armies and the raw materials that makes it work, which is the sepoys, the Indian troops that make up the different battalions. I've read, if you read, before I let you go in on this, when I read about the Maratha Wars, yes, that's in a way that's sort of the beginning of it, of this sort of beginning of division, because of the laws brought in by the Marquis of Cornwallis, which started to segregate things more, and British officers essentially handing things over more and more to senior Indian officers,
Yeah.
and then sort of you have this weird division in every battalion where you have the British officers kind of doing their thing, and the Indian officers sort of doing their thing. But at that point, they were actually somewhat still more connected, because you have very interesting accounts uh, of the daily interactions with each other. They were always defer. What were the Subadar majors or Risaldar majors would also always be consulted by senior British officers on practically everything to do with the running of the regiments and things like that. And but this basically broke down as time went on. The divide became greater and greater and greater. People started to misunderstand things, take things for granted, make bad decisions about the running of the different about the presidencies, especially that of Bengal, and bad things happened. What do you think about the Sepoy army and this
Yeah,
period?
yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, as you put it, there was a growing divide. Um, Having said that, if you look into the mutiny, a lot of soldiers, a lot of sepoys, um, they had sort of divided loyalties, if you like. I mean, we can go into the reasons for the mutiny, but there's an awful lot of British soldier, sepoys, civilians who actually escaped the massacres, and even the civilians help. There was sort of a lot of help from sort of Indian civilians helping British soldiers or civilians sort of escaping the mutiny. So there was a lot of divided loyalties there. So it wasn't quite, there wasn't that sort of animosity, if you like. There was several issues that really sort of annoyed the sepoys. But there wasn't that animosity, if you like,
Yeah, it was
that
more
you
of a
would expect.
disconnect. It's
Sorry?
more of it was more of a disconnect rather than a major
Yeah.
sort of passionate umbrage kind of thing. Because when you think about the actual reasons that are the main reasons for the mutiny, which is the thing about the cartridges, that's actually a very kind of, I'm going to say small, but it's sort of like an administrative failure rather than an actual um, people, unjust executions of sepoys or something like that, or people, or them being badly treated uh, by just being allowed to be slaughtered wholesale or done anything. They lose their rights as soldiers or something like that. It's actually quite a very small, but at the same time very big problem, because nobody realized it was a problem.
Yeah, yeah. I think you had a number of factors sort of appearing, during this time. You had the issue of the ammunition, and the grease that was being used in that. My personal feeling is that it was sort of tied to quite a sort of heavy sort of Christian missionary sort of movement during that time, and there was a sort of growing suspicion that the British had effectively taken over the country, and now that they've sort of consolidated themselves, now they were sort of moving to a sort of different sphere, if you like. Now that we control the country, let's change its its culture and its religion. So there was a sort of deep suspicion. I mean, people have written whole books on the sort of reasons for the mutiny, but I think that was probably one of the main sort of reasons behind it, and that fed into this issue of the ammunition.
So the
So
ammunition was like a catalyst of a bigger concern, basically.
that's right. Yeah, yeah. And even when the British authorities declared that they these guys can make their own grease if they want,
Yeah.
for the cartridges.
Yeah,
Things had
it's
gone
not.
a little bit too far by that
It's
time.
it's not like they didn't try to fix it. It's like they didn't like say, no, no, you're just going to bite these cartridges. Just suck it up. No, they actually did some. They did take steps to try and rectify the problem.
That's right. Yeah, and they did. Like I said, you could make your own grease. But by that time, people were sort of suspecting the paper.
Mhm.
The cartridge was held in as well.
Yeah.
And there was all sorts of other things going on. The food is being,
Mhm.
being sort of manipulated, to sort of break people's caste. So it was it's almost like a snowball effect. And
Mhm.
this was that, the ammunition was the, sort of single biggest factor in sort of pushing this to mutiny.
The breaking of trust between the soldiers and the officers, and when that happens, mutiny is not very far away, really.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, it was almost a complete sort of breakdown, really.
Mhm.
And you had this sort of period where, certainly for the first few weeks, the sepoys thought that the authorities would back down,
Mhm.
and just go back to the old ammunition. But that didn't happen, and so you had this sort of
Mhm.
use of the mail system to
Mhm.
for sepoys to actually communicate with their friends and family, villages, and before you know it, the whole from Calcutta to sort of borders of Afghanistan, all the all the regiments are sort of plotting to some extent or another. Obviously, some regiments didn't mutiny, or some mutinied a lot quicker, but to
Mhm.
some extent or another, pretty much the whole Bengal army were sort of, planning on mutiny, and
Yeah.
you know, uh,
I think it's interesting. A lot of people, I wonder what you think about this. A lot of people sort of cite General Napier as having some sort of an inkling that something was very wrong in the Bengal army. Um, and I was wondering what he saw and what you think about because he has some rather excellent quotes about you need to watch what's happening here
mm,
because you know, he's never quite specific enough to say that I think everybody's going to mutiny, but he's certainly saying that the army is going down the tube here, and something has to be done to stop it.
that's right. Yeah, I mean, he was quite worried about the sort of disconnect, as you put it, that was happening between the British officers and the sepoys. That sort of disconnect was never there. Sort of 30, 40 years before. But during this time, you had this sort of almost sort of parting of the ways, didn't you?
Mm,
And that worried him. But
hmm.
obviously, he wasn't, commander in chief for very long, was he?
No,
Or perhaps he could have, or he would have, maybe made changes or what have you.
interesting to ponder that. Interesting to ponder that, definitely.
Yeah, yeah.
But as
Um,
it happened, no steps were taken. Everybody let things happen, and when they tried to stop it happening, it was too late. Plots were afoot, and well, well, some dramatic things occurred, uh, which frightened an awful lot of people in high circles.
yeah.
I suppose we should mention that the Bengal Army is when we talk about the Bengal Army, we're not talking about the other presidency armies, which were largely unaffected by the mutiny.
Mm.
And also, I wanted to ask, in terms of the Bengal Army, there's the regular Bengal Army, the corps of infantry and cavalry and artillery battalions. I think they have artillery by this time, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
it's just at a certain point they wouldn't allow Indians to have be in artillery batteries.
Yeah.
But by this point you have artillery, infantry, and cavalry of the regular Bengal army, and then you have what did they call them? local battalions.
Yeah.
You have local battalions and irregulars of the Bengal Army,
Yeah.
and they're a little different.
Yeah.
And acted a little different in, like you were saying before, not everybody acted in the same way. I believe the battalions had a different reaction to the mutiny, and I believe, if I'm remembering correctly, this is because a lot of the sepoys were what you would term high caste, or considered themselves high caste sepoys, and a lot of the irregulars were not part of the regular army. They didn't have numbers. A lot of them didn't have to wear red coats, etc., like that.
Yeah.
I think the status of Skinner's horse at this point was still a regular light cavalry, and so you had a lot of different types of people in them. And so when we talk about the Bengal Army, we're not necessarily talking about the entirety of it, but the core of the regular Bengal Army.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. I mean, it was quite a confused sort of time. I think there was the various units that obviously stayed with the British, and especially in the Punjab, a huge number of irregular units based in the Punjab and elsewhere, who for their own reasons didn't want to join the mutiny. So it was quite a confused sort of period, I think. It was just a matter of which side sort of managed to in their sort of secret meetings, back at the cantonments and where they were based, deciding, shall we do it or shall we not, and it's a big decision.
Yeah. And what we will find out as we go on in this discussion is that British response to the mutiny actually is it's very important that there were these irregular units and the battalions and stuff that were not in the actual the regular Bengal Army, because they would play quite important roles. I'm speaking from my research into the Gurkhas here mostly as well. They were not part of the Bengal Army, and it's very interesting if you read about the Sirmur regiment, who were up in Dehradun when the mutiny broke out, and the attitude of the Gurkhas to the Bengal Army is pretty racist, really. The reason, if anybody wonders why some units did not join the mutiny, it's just because they did not like some of the units that did mutiny. They saw themselves as different because of their various statuses. And this became very important to various British units across the north, up to Punjab. And I always find it very fascinating, of course, that a lot of the units in Punjab are basically would you say Khalsa army soldiers? Yeah. Is that a fair term? Yeah. It's always a little different. You can say Sikh army, but that could mean Sikh British army, who also, we just, as far as I always get the impression that as far as the ex-soldiers of the Khalsa were concerned, well, we just fought these Bengali sepoys in 2 wars. I'm not going to join in.
That's right.
With you lot.
Right. Yeah, I mean, this goes back to the sort of confused nature of the whole thing, Josh. Yeah, I mean, there is a lot of racism, in at that time, if not now, certainly a lot of Punjabis, whether they're Muslim or Hindu, Sikh, tend to sort of look down on, the sort of Bengal sepoys who come from the east, Burbias, as they call them, as inferior, the smaller and less warlike, and then the sort of hardy, Punjabi villager or chap from the mountains, border areas,
I remember that the Gurkhas' name, including calling them Purbayas, is Kalalog, I think, which is just like black people, basically. Black people. So this is actually a really kind of intertwined, kind of much bigger. The bit when when people talk about the mutiny, you're talking about a specific part of it, and there's a lot of reasons why a lot of other units, theoretically also included within the sphere, at least, of the Bengal Army, didn't really care to indulge in it. I think
That's right. That's right. Yeah, and you know this goes down to civilian population as well. One of the things that the British commented on was the fact that the Muslim population tended to be a bit more or a lot more sort of pro mutiny than the Hindus. The feeling was they've got more to gain. If the Mughal empire is resuscitated, and the various sort of kings, and sort of rajas in India, a lot of them were Muslim. This was a chance to get back Muslim ascendancy in India. So that was the British impression that we can we can sort of conciliate the Hindus, but the Muslims are that much more pro mutiny, if you like. So there was a sort of breakdown. If you look at Delhi, for instance, there's various accounts that the Muslims were much more sort of vigorous in their support for the mutiny than the Hindus, and the same went for the upper classes, in Delhi. They obviously got a lot to lose. A lot of the businessmen and the if you read the accounts, first-hand accounts, and what the the news sort of was the kind of news that was reaching the British camp, when they reached Delhi, was that a lot of the businessmen, a lot of the traders are obviously losing huge amounts of money. There were a lot less sort of enthusiastic for the mutiny than the people who've got much less to lose. So yeah, it was a I suppose that's what makes it interesting. I think there's a whole sort of hodgepodge of things going on. Nothing is as it seems. In the mutiny, and yeah.
But one thing that is absolutely what absolutely happened is that the Bengal Army, the regular Bengal Army, mutinied, and the British found themselves no longer in control of a very, very large group of armed troops.
That's right. Yeah, yeah. I mean, the mutiny broke out in Meerut, which is I think it's about 35 miles away from Delhi, so pretty close. It's just a night's march, really, a day's march from Delhi. You had 3 sepoy regiments there, or rather 2 infantry, 1 cavalry units. They mutinied, pretty much marched en masse. Well, the mutiny broke out on the 10th of May, if I recall correctly. Yes, it was, 10th of May. All 3 mutinied. During that night, they marched to Delhi. There's another 3 sepoy infantry regiments stationed in Delhi. No European troops there, although there's a scattering of various European officers there, but no regiments there. So within 2 days, there's there's a sort of rebel force, 6 regiments strong,
That's
which
a brigade and a half
suddenly
at least.
appeared, and is in control of Delhi. So it's like from a a situation morning of 10th May, which there's nothing happening, to the end of the 11th of May, basically 2 days later, you've got a considerable force that's now sort of mutinied and is in control of the old imperial capital. And not just in control, they're sort of on the rampage and massacring Europeans and anyone who's been very prominently pro-European, Indian Christians, and looting and plundering the city. So absolutely amazing sort of turn of events.
Yeah, it happens extremely fast. Nobody has a grip on what to do. And like you say, and this is also going to come up a lot, lack of European regiments. And the British put a lot of stress on this as a problem. During the early stages of the mutiny, there not being enough European regiments to kind of ensure that the mutinous sepoys could be contained or something, because there was an appreciation that still, I mean, back in the 1803 in the Morato War, there was pretty much the impression that one European regiment was worth 2 or 3 sepoy ones or something like that, maybe unfair, I don't know, difficult to quantify, but the British still felt this way, and so they felt that if there had been a British battalion in Delhi or at Meerut or close enough to stop it. I don't know actually what the situation was in Meerut. I've forgotten what the situation was in Meerut, but if there had been a battalion, certainly in Delhi, they could have held the place, basically, or something like that.
Yeah, that's an interesting question, and there was a lot of debate about that. During the mutiny and after the mutiny as well. If there'd just been a European force in Delhi, just blocking the bridge, across the River Jamna, the mutineers would never have made it. And there was also the issue of the European troops at Meerut, who never really, due to their commanding officer, never chased the mutineers. They never tried to, pursue them. Instead, they just went into, sort of lockdown, into almost a purely sort of defensive sort of role or situation. Sort of barricaded themselves in, thinking, they're the ones that are going to be under attack. So they didn't do anything. There was no European troops in Delhi. So that pretty much made it, as easy as possible for, the sepoys to come to Delhi, effectively take over. You had the British magazine in Delhi, which was armed mainly or manned mainly by locals. There's about 10, 12 British officers there, artillery officers, but about as nominal a force of Europeans as you can get, sort of manning the magazine. So as soon as the mutineers arrived in Delhi, they realised, oh, hang on, there's a massive, great magazine here, up for grabs, nothing to stop us. The 3 regiments, European British regiments, sepoy regiments based in Delhi have joined us, and what do you need for a mutiny? You need ammunition. And you've got this massive, great, magazine just sitting there, right in the middle of Delhi, which is not sort of defendable as well. Even if there were European troops there, it's very, very difficult to defend being inside the city, and the situation it was in, the location it was in. And the British officers managed to blow up some of the magazine, and some of them managed to sort of leg it, basically, to flee. And they actually thought that they'd actually blown up the whole thing, but they hadn't. They'd just blown up a small portion of the supplies in the magazine. And this magazine would then essentially, power the mutiny in Delhi. There was, just looking, in advance, there was some ammunition for, the rebels coming from other directions, a few other guns, but by and large, they depended on the munitions and the supplies that were in the Delhi magazine. So that, that essentially changed the whole picture.
Quite dramatically.
That's
as
right.
well.
Yes. Yeah.
So yeah, the criticism leveled at the commander at Meerut, I don't think is necessarily leveled in terms of him being wrong to kind of on the night sort of forcing up, but sort of the next day, or like when he knew that the rebels had moved on, not at least trying to harry them a little, because there's sort of a rule in warfare in India that you must always attack, basically, even if they outnumber you ridiculous amounts. Attacking is what you do, even if you have just a small force. And a lot of old India hands didn't understand this sort of turtle type stance when I mean, because as well, I guess what would the state of the mutineers have been? I mean, what sort of order were they in? Did they have any kind of, were they under discipline?
I don't think they were, Josh. If they had any sort of order, any sort of organization, if they'd planned the mutiny properly, it would have been very difficult for, the Europeans at Meerut to, have survived, never mind, sort of do anything else, It was a very sort of chaotic sort of mutiny. And this basically allowed, the European troops to sort of, organize themselves. They didn't do much beyond that, but at least they, they had control of the cantonment. So that was that, and if they'd actually taken the initiative at that point and sort of harried the, the mutineers, things would have been very different. But I mean, the commanding officer at Meerut, his excuse was that there was quite a few, European civilians in that city at that time. It was very difficult to defend the cantonment as well, with the kind of troops he had. If he'd sort of started chasing the mutineers, it could have been, a massacre.
It would have been very risky, definitely.
Back at the ranch, So, I mean, you could argue that he had a case, but really, I think,
he did the principled thing. Yeah, he did the principled thing. He had several options. He didn't do the reckless thing, which was probably the right thing with hindsight. But he did do a right course of action. In one of the right courses of action, it just wasn't the most effective one in terms of trying to stop what was going on. And this is interesting as well. So the mutineers obviously aren't under discipline. They don't have really a plan. Their only plan is to get to Delhi, it would appear. Do they have who's in? So how does it's fascinating, the progression. The British are basically reeling and trying to figure out what to do. And then in Delhi, I mean, okay, so we've mutinied. We've successfully taken Delhi. We can loot the place if we want. We can get ammunition. We have supplies. Now what? What's the plan? What do we want? What's...
Yeah. Well, I think both, as you said, both camps were in confusion. The British in Meerut who were, not quite sure what to do. But that was double, even more so for, the mutineers. Once they'd actually reached Delhi, they essentially wasted time. in taking the magazine. They actually arrived very early in the morning of the 11th of May. I think the magazine was blown up about 3-4 p.m. that same day. So a lot of that early part of the day was just spent, just going into the palace, the Mughal, the Red Fort, looting, pillaging, killing European, civilians here and there, anywhere you can find them. There were basically people looting the bank, and other places. And that wasn't just for the first day. That sort of almost continued, for the next few weeks. Albeit in perhaps more organized fashion. But rather than sort of getting the sort of Delhi population behind them, and acting in a very disciplined way, they almost seem to have just lost all discipline. So you could argue, were their sort of principles noble in the sense that they were mutinying, and that's. You could argue about that, but certainly once they'd mutinied and then they'd actually reached Delhi, they seem to have lost all sort of cohesion, and they certainly didn't accept, the royal princes, as their, as their commanding officers, or the the Mughal emperor as their, as their chief, if you like. So
I was going to say there's a distinct lack of named leaders trying to organize things. It's basically seems to be up to the soldiers, various bands of soldiers in various sizes, battalion to company to any number, sort of doing what they want, and it seems, like you say, very chaotic. And of course, now they're now they're right down the hole. They've crossed the Rubicon. The die has been cast. There's no going back now, and there's just no concrete plan of what to do. There's no one general appointed. They don't like. How does it evolve into some sort of actual resistance or strategy, or what's their plan going on from this?
Yeah. Well, the plan was that there was no plan, I think.